handout is just a very interesting one. It's kind of my confabulation from a lot of different sources and so on. Some of you perhaps maybe received Roy Eugene Davis's material, and the essence of the handout is the back of his material. I think we're fine, Margie, yeah. So what I'd like to do is just kind of guide you through the handout, and you'll see where it's all going, hopefully. So let's begin at the very top. Socrates. Socrates, of course, was the Greek philosopher, and his basic direction in life was to know yourself. Still the hardest thing to know the self that you truly are. We kind of feel that we do know that self that we truly are, but many people still have a difficulty of really knowing who they truly are. So Socrates' dictum was always to know yourself, and that became the basis really of Western philosophy, but it's really the basis of all of life. In the block are some comments by Roy Eugene Davis. He has such a wonderful, wonderful presentation of life and so on. So in that particular block, in the bold-faced black print, you have his words, and then I could not wait to comment on his words, so you have mine in the little blue print. So, yeah, just to expand it a little bit. So to be spiritually enlightened, do these things. This is what Roy Eugene Davis encourages us to do. Want to be fully conscious, I would just want to add, in this lifetime. No need for us to wait. See or perceive things clearly, what really is, and that's really seeing things from your heart center. Know truly from your heart first. That's always the key, knowing what's going on within you. And then think rationally with your mind. Don't confuse the order. We have a tendency to think before we feel. Very important to feel before we think. And then behave wisely. You know better. Act constructively. You will know how, especially as your heart guides you. Meditate superconsciously. That just means daily. Live skillfully and effectively as your heart guides you, and constantly aspire to be fully self and God realized again in this lifetime. So we see clearly Roy Eugene Davis's guidance, my little stuff in the blue, just adding a little. But what I especially want to call your attention to is the bottom. Socrates said, know yourself at the top. The God Spirit encourages us to know yourself. So very, very important for us to see the difference between knowing yourself simply as a human personality and knowing your true self from the God Spirit. So obviously our goal today is to know that true self from that God Spirit that is really at the center of our being. So you can take this home and mull over this as you desire and so on. And let me share with you the title of today's talk, which is The Three Golden Rules. The Three Golden Rules. Perhaps you know one or two. The third one I think will be interesting. So let's begin first of all talking about the month of January. I think for each one of us, the month of January, I think anyways, has been a wonderful opportunity for us to witness growth within our own selves. I think each one of us is not just making New Year's resolutions, but I think we're growing in awareness. We feel that presence within ourselves. And probably the nicest thing, of course, is as you feel that love within yourself, that ability then to extend this love to the people with whom you share your life, rather than being negative or a little down, feeling that anticipation of joy, being consciously aware, being happy to be alive, and bringing that energy into our daily activities with people. This particular month's teaching is going to be a follow-up to last month's teaching. You might recall last month's teaching was entitled The Tipping Point. And the tipping point, very simply, was learning to see ourselves from simply being a limited human being, just seeing ourselves more as an eternal soul. Let me just say it again. That tipping point is tipping over from seeing yourself simply as a limited human being to seeing yourself as an eternal soul that is connected to your source. Just want to say it again. that eternal soul that is connected to your source. You're sitting here right now. There's a part of you that is connected to the God Spirit. And whether you're here or anyplace else, there's always a part of you that is connected. And that's what we want to focus in on, that point of connection. So today's teaching is entitled The Three Golden Rules, and it'll be an expansion of the tipping point lesson. I'm probably going to talk a few minutes longer today. I hope I don't drone on. Give me a drone on signal, cut or something like that. But hopefully I'm not going to drone on too much today. Don, don't give me that signal too quickly over there.
Anybody but me.
Yeah, anyone but Don. There you go. Well, the traditional teaching of the Golden Rule certainly has been an interesting one. And the tradition usually by and large is as follows. Treat others the way that you would like to be treated. While this is a wonderful rule to guide human behavior, it has often been overruled by two other golden rules. So let me explain. First of all, another rendition of the golden rule is the following. The person who has the gold makes the rules. Another way of saying this is that the person in power, the person who is in authority, ends up being the person who makes the rules, or who has made the rules. We especially see this in today's society. Certainly in government and in business, the people in power are the ones who make the rules. People will often, of course, try to get away with as much as they possibly can, until eventually they are caught, and then they become sorry, and then they ask for forgiveness. All the while knowing that they are the ones who have made the rules, and many times are the ones who have broken the rules that they made. Well, with this notion, people in power, in a sense, make the rules, I want to take you back to two of my college days of teaching. It was always very interesting to me. The two incidents that occurred were, first of all, I often taught professional ethics, and I would ask my students, would you like it if someone lied to you? If some professional took advantage of you? And they would say, well, of course not. No, I don't want anyone to lie to me. And then I would ask them, if you were in a situation where you could lie to someone else, would you mind lying to someone else if it was to your advantage? And they said, I probably would do it. Would not want someone to lie to them, but perhaps they wouldn't mind lying to someone else. Of course, until you sometimes get caught, because the more you lie, the riskier life gets, and you keep on taking those risks until you get caught and then become repentant. The other situation was a little more elevating, I thought. It was my good friend Plato. Plato and I are just good buddies from way, way, way back. And one of the most interesting things I ever read in my life is when I was reading Plato. I didn't always understand it, but I kind of got this feeling. When asked the question, would people take advantage of others? Plato said, yes, they do. But he gave two very interesting conclusions. The first one, he said, was many times when people take advantage of others, they eventually get caught. They lie, they cheat, they steal, and then eventually they get caught and they get punished. But it was the second thing that he said that was very interesting to me, and it was very helpful in my own personal life. He said that people who lie, cheat, and steal will never know the joy of loving service. People that lie, cheat, and steal, who take advantage, will never know the joy of loving service to others. And that always just made such a deep impression upon me. I would like to be one of those types of people, by and large, who could be in loving service to others, rather than taking advantage, to be able to know the joy of being in that relationship of loving service was just very, very important for me. Any person who in authority hopefully would use that authority to be in loving service, but we know that many people unfortunately do not. Not only in a sense does power corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. Yeah, just one of those things of life. Well, fortunately anyways, there is a second golden rule. And the second golden rule is found in mostly all of the spiritual traditions of life. And that particular golden rule is simply treating others the way that you would like to be treated. Now, let me go back and just kind of take another look at this and so on. So when I go back to my philosophical studies, I always enjoyed philosophy and so on. There is a particular philosopher, in addition to my two pals, Plato and Aristotle, that was very, very informative for me and very helpful to me. This guy, his name was Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, just a very interesting person. Again, I would read him, and I don't know if I got everything out of him, but I just enjoyed reading him. And he always seemed to talk in such a way that was very logical and very practical. Now, that always appealed to me. Let it be logical, let it be practical. So Immanuel Kant had this version of the golden rule. It was rather interesting. In fact, he called it, fancy name, the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative, which simply meant you ought to do it all the time. You should do it without exception. And this was his golden rule. Act in such a way that you would want everyone to act in that situation. Act in such a way that you would want everyone else to act in that particular situation. Kind of another rendition of the golden rule. Well, I really like that because many times I would look at my own life and I would just say to myself, are you acting in such a way that you would like other people to act? That was very helpful to me. Sometimes I wasn't always acting in the way that I would like everyone else to act towards me. So it was very, very helpful for me to take a better look at it and say, well, if I'm going to do something, I should want everyone else to do something. And if I could not say everyone else should do it, it would be a good indication that I should not do it as well. That was just very helpful to me. But I must admit, it was Jesus who gave us a little something that I thought was missing from Immanuel Kant. So this is what Jesus had to say, kind of fun, concerning the golden rule. Jesus was asked by his disciples, what is the law and what is the prophets? How do you sum up the law and the prophets? And you might recall, Jesus said, well, they really can be summed up in two commandments. The first one, you should love the Lord your God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength. And then he said, the second one is like the first. The second one is, you should then love your neighbor as yourself. Well, this provided me with a little greater insight. All of a sudden, the notion of loving your neighbor was comparable in a sense to loving God. That's pretty interesting when you start thinking about that. So, the two observations that came to me as I looked at these things, loving God, whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself. The first thing that came to me was, unless you love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and strength, you're probably not going to like those tough neighbors. Some of your neighbors are difficult. Sometimes they're downright obnoxious. And unless you have that love of God within you, if you don't have that love of God first within you, then just realistically, it's pretty tough to love those neighbors. It's very, very difficult when that neighbor is mouthy, in your face, and so on. So I found that to be very, very interesting, the notion that in order for you to love your neighbor, well, you first have to love God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That was pretty interesting to me. And then Jesus, when he went on to say, he said that loving your neighbor is really the same as the first, namely loving God. Well, that kind of raised the stakes to me. It's like, the love you have for your neighbor is a part of the love you have for God. It was like the golden rule is not just between you and your neighbor. The golden rule is now between you and your neighbor and the God Spirit. That was pretty interesting to me. That is why I think a third golden rule needs to be affirmed. This is not my golden rule, but I wish I kind of had said it. I think it's pretty good. I would suggest that this golden rule is really implied in A Course of Miracles, but it needs just a little bit of a clearer statement. I think the golden rule should be this: to expand your spiritual consciousness and to assist others to do the same. I think the golden rule should be, you should expand your spiritual consciousness and then invite others to do the same. It's kind of a higher version of what Socrates said. Socrates said, know yourself, which is very important, but the self that you know is really such an important thing for us to be able to ascertain, to know that spirit within us that is so very, very important. It was the absence of the expansion of your spiritual consciousness, and a very noticeable absence, that made people who say the golden rule is the person that has the goal makes the rule, that was absent. A person can become very narcissistic, and they can, in a sense, take advantage of people because they have not expanded their spiritual consciousness. And if the truth be told, I think it's really very, very difficult, in a sense, to love your neighbor if you haven't expanded that consciousness within yourself. If you first don't know yourself as that loving, loving person that is connected to the God Spirit, and then feel, now I can invite others to this. Pretty hard to do it if you don't have that sense of knowing yourself. So hopefully what you see now is the importance of the tipping point. Remember I said the tipping point was learning how to see yourself, who you are. And the two things I mentioned in the tipping point, first of all, is to be able to see yourself as an eternal soul, rather than simply as a nice human being. And then the second part, if you recall, not only to see yourself as an eternal soul, but seeing yourself connected to your source. Right here, right now, we are connected to that God Spirit. That's the tipping point. Once you have tipped over and see yourself in that way, now you're coming to know yourself, and then are able to invite others to do the same. Such a beautiful understanding. So I'm going to suggest to you that there are three things in the sense of knowing yourself that becomes very important. First of all, choice, then focus, and then lastly, time. First of all, choice. Probably the most important thing in life is learning, in a sense, to view yourself in this awareness. But it's a very difficult thing at times to view yourself in this conscious awareness, in this high spiritual energy, because so many of the people in our lives have had a tendency to downplay us. Many times people in your family would say, well, who do you think you are, Missy? Life was never meant to be a bed of roses. And you have people in society when they say, you're only human, you're only human. And many times religions will say, you're a sinner, you know, you're a sinner. You just have all of these things, in a sense, that have a tendency to diminish you rather than to expand you. And what we would say very clearly is that, well, we know who we are. We've tipped. We're eternal souls who are connected to our God Spirit. This is such an important thing for each one of us. Let me suggest these two other things that might be helpful. It's such a relief, first of all, to know that the only one you're really responsible for is yourself. But even more than that, it's such a relief to know that the most important thing to pursue is the presence within you, and not the things outside of you that are so hard to get, so hard to maintain, and darn it, they're temporary, and then you die. It just seems like that it's not a good way of progressing through life. The second thing that comes into play is two of our members recently said a couple of things. The first one of our members said that in knowing myself as a spiritual being, as a soul, it is the most practical thing I have ever done in my life. It just makes my life so much better because no matter what I do it from that place within me. I didn't always do it from there, but now I do. And that place within me has truly become my guide. And then we had another member who said it very nicely. She said, the more that I know myself as a soul, she said, I've come to love myself. That's all I want to talk about, quite frankly, to help others to be in this joy. And then she said this so very nicely. She said, I really want everyone to know what I have come to know. It's kind of like Barbara Marx Hubbard. She would say, the most important thing you could possibly do is to invite someone else to know who they are once you've discovered who you are. Still the most beautiful thing. So what I would suggest, we need the choice. The second thing we need, obviously, is to be able to have a focus. To have a focus. And this is what I would suggest to you, the two following things. Hopefully I'm not droning. Thank you. Hopefully I'm not droning. Almost there. The first one is to have no doubts about your power. If you sit here and say, well, I'm an eternal soul connected, but you don't feel that, if there's doubts and negativity going on within yourself, it's very difficult in a sense to get over. So what I would suggest to you, therefore, is this conclusion. At any given moment, when you begin to get a little fearful, perhaps maybe doubt just a little bit, it's so important at that particular moment to stop. Stop. Very important for you to go within, feel your power, know your guidance. Very important to stop, go within, feel your power, know your guidance. As we do this just more and more and more, this awareness is now becoming what I like to say are all the time, eyes opened, walking around in the world, sense of self. We're kind of joy beams. It's just the way we are. And the second thing that I would suggest that becomes very important is that this is such an important thing for us. The goal of life is not to overcome your problems. Who would want to do that day in and day out? The goal of life is to create your joy. The goal of life is to bring forth the goodness that is within you, whatever it might be, the smallest little things to the larger things. But this is the key. Every time you create joy, every time you just kind of do something nice, you then begin to realize that as I do these nice things, I kind of build up within myself what I call a spiritual bank account. So the more you build up the better things, the easier it is to withdraw from that account when you're facing a difficulty. If you haven't made any deposits, there's not much to withdraw from. But every time we make a deposit of goodness, and that builds up, you begin to feel the power you need to deal with whatever you have to deal with. Then there's no doubt. It doesn't mean that every challenge is taken away. It's just that you know where it's coming from, and you can deal with it from that higher place. We're learning to do that. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. The second thing I think that is very interesting, I think, for each one of us is that as we continue to build this goodness within ourselves, we're beginning to understand that this is not just the way it works. It's the way it works. It works. Every time we do it, it works. And as we continue to do it every time, and it works, it becomes our way of living. So we talked about choice, focus. Let me just briefly make a comment about time. Time is a pretty interesting thing, to say the least. So it takes time to be able to know yourself. So I'd like to make a comment, then simply a distinction. First of all, the comment. The biggest drawback for most of us is taking the time to daily enter into the stillness, to access the guidance, and to allow it to guide us. It's the daily discipline. No question about that. But as we do that, things become just very, very important for us. One little problem along the way. There's a tendency to think, when everything is going okay for ourselves, there's a tendency to think that things going okay is a substitute for soul growth. Things are going well. Well, I don't need to meditate anymore. I just want to give you my encouragement that just because things are going well, don't allow your mind to delude you that you don't need to continue the meditation and to expand. Roy Eugene Davis would say, you ought to do it. I just said, you ought to do it daily. Pretty important. The distinction I'd like to make is this. It's tricky sometimes. It's just tricky about how to grow and develop. So I'm going to suggest a couple of little things, then I'm going to make a little comment, then we're going to come to a conclusion. So the first thing is, obviously, it's very important to take personal time to spiritually enter into the silence within you. We know that. What's very important for us is that you come to realize you don't want to be a better old version of yourself, but rather you really would like to be a better new version of yourself. You know that little parody we would always say, good, better, best, never let it rest until the good becomes better and the better best. It's one thing just to be good. It's quite another to be your best. And I just want to give you that encouragement. Your daily time helps you to become your best. And then the second thing I would just want to mention to you is that just realistically, as we're doing here, and when we move into the meditation, I think we just realize that whenever we meditate in a group, it just makes a difference. There just is an energy that seems to come about all of us over here. I like to kind of say it in these words, none of us is as good as all of us. All of us are better than any of us. That group spirit is so very important. But I said it was tricky. Here's the tricky part. There's a difference between chronological time and soul time. Just because you're taking chronological time doesn't mean you're doing soul time. What's very important is that in the midst of your chronological time, you experience soul time. It's the experience of the soul presence within you. That's the joy. That's the fun. So I just want to encourage you, it's not just putting in time, but it's rather growing in soul time and in soul experience. Okay, well, in conclusion, might have thought never going to get there, but we did. In conclusion, someone might say, well, wait a minute, Vince, you haven't talked about that golden rule of loving your neighbor as yourself. You just didn't say enough about that. Doesn't that golden rule still count? Of course it does. What I would just want to suggest is that the most important thing is to know yourself. That's the golden rule. To know yourself, connected to your source, and then the love of your neighbor boils down to this, in inviting others to do the same. Knowing that spirit within you and extending an invitation to others to come to know the same Spirit. That's the golden rule. That's really moving it forward. So let's keep that in mind, and let's move ourselves into our meditation. I welcome you to our meditation today, and just knowing that what a wonderful opportunity it is for us to meditate together, knowing that that presence within each one of us is amplified whenever we come together as a group. Fully now dedicate yourself to this meditation. It'll be on knowing yourself. Let's begin our meditation as we are wont to do by simply focusing on the breath, just breathing in and breathing out, nothing forced, but being attentive. If a thought comes into your mind, just let it pass and just resume your natural breathing rhythm, and then I'll come to guide you shortly. Please begin with your natural breathing rhythm. And just to help you with the meditation, when you inhale, just say to yourself the word in. When you exhale, the word out. In and out, using your natural breathing rhythm. Nothing forced, but stay focused. Be attentive. In and out. Please continue. I'm going to give you another set of guide words. When you inhale, just say to yourself the word inner. When you exhale, the word quiet. Inner, quiet. And focus on the energy of the words. When you inhale, nothing forced, but feel the breath coming into you. When you exhale, feel the quiet, the peace going out of you. Inner, quiet. Your natural breathing rhythm. Please continue. Now, just before we continue, I'm going to ask you to notice something. Would you just notice how calm you're becoming? A calm energy within you, a calmness here in the room. Just notice that. A settling. Physically comfortable. Your mind at ease. And just a sense of calmness. Quite alert, but very calm. Let's do one more thing before we proceed more deeply into the meditation. If you would just take your hand and place it over your heart, lung area. And when you inhale, feel the breath. Feel your lungs rising. The movement will be slight but noticeable. When you exhale, feel your lungs emptying. Again, the movement will be slight but noticeable. Feel the breath. Feel the breath coming and going. Feel your breath. Please continue. You may place your hand back on your lap. And then I'm going to ask you to notice a second thing. Would you notice how you've turned inward? The focus of your attention has turned inward. Just notice this. And would you just say to yourself, here I am. Here I am, inside. This is me. This is me. You are now your soul self. Feel this. This is me. This is me. Now there's one more thing. You here, as your soul self, are connected to your God Spirit. Would you simply feel the connection? Your soul will know it. Feel it. Right here, right now, you now know yourself. The best thing you can do for another is to invite them to know themselves as you have come to know yourself. This is the golden rule. I'll say it again. The golden rule is upon knowing yourself, inviting others to know themselves in the same way. By your example. Let us now end the meditation by bringing our attention, our energy back into the room. Again, our eyes gently closed. And with your energy focused in the room, would you simply extend your energy just to each other here this morning? May we just support each other, encourage each other. Help each other where we can, inspire each other. And would you notice how nice it feels to be inspirational to each other? For truly, all of us are better than just any one of us. And then would you bring that energy into yourself, into your physical body, right here, right now. And just allow this energy to fill every nook and cranny. And would you just know how good this feels? Ah, yes, this is me. This is my spirit in the body. May you feel this, experience it. And just when you're ready, may you just gently breathe your eyes open, nice little smile on your face, and just allow your goodness to shine through.